We all know how all these platforms love to take credit for as much as they can. And the results on this particular test were pretty incredible. We saw 1-day click attribution window. They over-reported by, I think it was 55% on platform. And 7-day click, 1-day view attribution window over-reported backend conversions that were attributed to Facebook by, I think, upwards of 200% or 190%.
Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome to Growth Mentors, the podcast where we share snackable growth hacks, strategies, and best practices in how to drive maximum marketing impact and grow your bottom line. I'm your host, Matt LeBlanc, and today we're going to be talking about attribution windows. What the heck are they, and why are they important? With my friend, Dave Armstrong. Dave is the director of paid media at Jump 450 and really just a consistent growth mentor on this series if you haven't been watching. He has deep expertise in many different areas, and I'm really excited to talk to him today. How you doing, Dave?
I'm doing great, Matt. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Let's jump right into this. Yeah. What is an attribution window, first and foremost?
An attribution window, they're also termed as conversion windows, but basically an attribution window is a defined period of time that conversion events can be claimed by a platform or a publisher, so Meta or email or display. So conversions are tracked and reported within some certain software dashboards, and those allow you visibility into your marketing efforts. This allows you to calculate ROI, CPA. It allows you to understand which channels are delivering the best results for your budget, and then optimize your campaigns.
That's thank you for that definition. Immediately, I'm like, why aren't we just calling these conversion windows? For some reason, that is like a lot more of a literal definition to me. It immediately makes me understand it more. But I'm just going to like out myself here and say like, this is like totally not my area. And I really need you to walk me through the specifics of these attribution windows. So that's good to know. So what are typical attribution windows? Tell us about some of the different kinds.
Yeah, so types, there are a few different types of attribution windows, but the typical ones are basically 1-day click, 1-day view, 7-day click, and then upwards of 28-day click or 30-day click. And what that actually means is there's a defined period of time. We'll call it, for this example, 7-day click, where a user clicks on your ad, and then within 7 days, they perform your particular conversion event. So if I'm optimizing towards purchase in Meta, and I have a 7-day click attribution window attached to my ad set, I'm telling Facebook to count or use all of the data signals for that purchase event within that 7-day window. So all of those data signals will feed that campaign and optimize over time.
Right. And some of the different types. So you're saying 7-day click is one type. Can you kind of walk us through what some of the other types are?
Yep. Yeah. So I mentioned 1-day click. That's basically the same as 7-day click, but instead of counting for 7 days, it'll count for 24 hours or 1 day. There's also 1-day view. 1-day view is an interesting one. It's one that people are using to a vastly popular attribution window to use because it makes your campaigns look great in platform. And that's something that I'll talk about a little bit later. But view attribution is different than click attribution. So I mentioned click attribution. Somebody clicks on your ad, somebody plays your video, somebody likes your ad or comments on your ad. That counts as a click. If they end up converting, then that campaign will get attribution for that conversion. On a view base, all someone has to do is view your ad. I believe it's 3 seconds of a view if that's on a static ad or a carousel ad or a video ad, obviously. And then if they convert within 24 hours, that campaign will also get credit for that conversion too. I talked a little bit about 28-day click or 30-day click. These are viewable. 28-day click is viewable in Facebook, you can't actually optimize to it. And I'll define that in a little bit as well, because that gets a little convoluted. But 30-day click is where you'll be able to optimize to 30-day click on Google, on Pinterest, on some other platforms, but not on Facebook. And that's the same thing as a click conversion, but you are attributing 30 days worth of data after that click to those particular campaigns. I think it's important to note too, Matt, that attribution windows are very important because they allow you to basically perform a bunch of different types of marketing functions. You have a better understanding of the user journey. You can track different campaign metrics and then therefore optimize your ad spend. And I have a little bit of a pet peeve here, so I'll just kind of dive straight into my annoyances. And this might take me a little bit to get some context into, but basically there's always arguments on which window is best, which channel or which platform is showing the best results. And the answer, in my opinion, is none of them, but a small portion of all of them are correct. So it's really important to make this distinction. And that distinction is looking at attribution windows versus channel performance as a whole, and then using specific window tests versus channel or campaign performance as a directional indication of performance. And my pet peeve in particular is that when you look in platform, you'll see your CPA or you'll see your ROAS for your campaigns, and it would be way more accurate to, instead of calling that a CPA or a cost per action, it'd be way more accurate to call that a cost per influenced action. Or instead of revenue, it would be influenced revenue. Or instead of ROAS, it'd be influenced ROAS. And it might be semantics to some people might be laughing at that, but honestly, I think that particular distinction will solve a lot of the arguments that come up or that occur from trying to judge real performance versus the deltas of performance that you see on platforms and the various attribution windows that are running, and what's actually occurring from a backend revenue perspective or a backend attribution window perspective.
Dave, is that a good question? Like, I'm just kind of like trying to get a sense, like, what is that argument that so commonly happens? Why is that that specificity important to you in terms of like cost per influenced acquisition?
Yeah, I can answer that. So the distinction of my pet peeve of wanting to add influenced action or influenced ROAS to that particular KPI or that particular metric is because of the argument of all of these platforms taking so much credit for a real conversion. Other ways of saying this are overcounting. You might have, if you add up all your conversions within Facebook and within Google and within TikTok, you might see that you've got 600 conversions, but then you look at your Shopify store and you only sold 250 products. So all of those platforms are influencing those conversions in some way or another, either a view-based conversion, engaged view-based conversion, or a click-based conversion. And they'll all take credit for them if that particular thing occurred. And it's way more accurate to say that they influenced the action. I like to think of it this way because no one platform, when in this day and age with how much research people do before they buy products, how many different touch points you have when you buy a product, especially for some of those larger priced purchases, you're gonna research it in a bunch of different ways. You might see an ad on your way to work, and you might see that ad on Instagram, and then you might forget about it. And then a week later, you might have a conversation with a friend where it pops up again. So then you go and search them on Google, or you go directly to their website if you remembered it. You might sign up for their newsletter at that point, and then you get some emails, and then 3 weeks later, they might have a sale, and then you convert that way. So there's not necessarily much of a linear customer journey that a lot of these brands have, and to try and judge a platform based on one type of attribution window and then fully trust all of the conversions that it's taking credit for to optimize your campaigns, you're going to probably be making some mistakes. So that's why it's important to understand the distinction between that word of an influenced action, but it's also important to understand the ecosystem that you're driving in. So there's another kind of important note that comes from here, and it's that there are no one size fits all windows for advertisers. Like I want to be telling our e-com advertisers to all run on one day click, and I wouldn't say the same thing to some of our B2B clients that we have. There's testing that needs to be done because some clients might have longer sales cycles. There's some clients who might have instant purchase behavior or a higher coefficient of impulse buying behavior. You might be running on one channel. You might be running on 10 different channels. There's a ton of differences between all of the user journeys, all of the product types, the service types, the sales cycles, and therefore there should be a ton of testing going into the actual windows that you're running with.
So there's a gap between what is actually being told to you through these attribution windows and what is actually happening. How can somebody sort of adjust for that? One of the things that you said was that, an attribution window can tell you about your customer journey. And then, not to call you out, but almost in the next breath, you were like, you can't always trust that story that you're being told. So is there a way for us to, be more sure of the story that we're hearing, or is there a way to look and find a more accurate story?
Yeah, there is. And to kind of go back to that last point, attribution windows do tell you more of the story about the influences of your campaigns or the customer journey, but it's not the entire story, right? So to just judge, say, all of your campaigns on a one-day click attribution window, especially if you have a longer sales cycle, would be a mistake. And in order to combat that, in order to gain more data, it's necessary to prioritize two key areas, right? Number one, it's necessary to run all of these window tests. So I mentioned all of the different types that you can run: one-day click, one-day view, 7-day click, etc. And you need to view which window or which campaigns or ad set windows you're testing have measurable results from a back-end revenue perspective or an incremental impact perspective on your business. And then most importantly, you need to methodically implement that strategy for that particular channel, for that particular target, and if you really want to get crazy with it, for that particular creative theme as well. Nobody really does that because it's pretty crazy and you never get enough data to make the correct decision really there, or the highest confidence interval decisions there. The number two key area to prioritize is, once you set this attribution window testing up and you choose one, it's necessary to view the trends of different windows still, because those windows will give you insight into how your campaigns or targets or procedural tests, if you've watched prior episodes, or creatives or creative themes, are influencing conversions on an overall level. So on Meta, for example, you're able to choose, I should say this too, you're able to choose fewer windows to optimize to than you actually have access to view from a reporting standpoint. So you can choose on Meta, you can choose one-day click attribution to optimize your ad set to, 7-day click attribution to optimize your ad set to, one-day view or no view, and one-day engaged view on video ads or no engaged view attribution on video ads. And then if you're viewing the actual performance in terms of a reporting perspective, you actually have one extra attribution window that you can look into, and that's a 28-day click window. Anybody who was advertising on Meta, I think it was 3 years ago at this point, you'll remember that you were actually able to optimize to 28-day click conversions also, which was really big in the B2B space, especially the longer sales cycle space. So it's important to kind of make those 2 points, those two key areas to prioritize. And hopefully that gives you a little bit more of a clue as to how you can actually view the performance and what you can optimize to and why that's important too.
Sure. So it seems like, being the type of business that you are would be one sort of distinguishing factor on like what type of attribution window you're going to choose to run on. You said B2B, you're going to want, longer lead times on those purchases and such. So you're probably going to want something like 28 days. But how do you choose the best attribution window for your business? What should brands be running on?
You make another really good point, and one thing that I didn't add to that last piece, and it's not just how the sales cycle is for your company. So B2B, you might have longer sales cycles. You might have really short ones too. It really just depends on what your particular average is. But even with e-com, you could have longer sales cycles as well. But the other important piece there is the actually matching that attribution window up to the particular stage or the particular optimization event in your campaigns. So if you're running more top of funnel awareness or top of funnel even conversion based campaigns, sometimes running a longer window makes sense because that's the first time these people or these users may have even been introduced to your company or have seen an ad of yours. And if you're not a really like a strictly impulse buying or impulse decision, the example I'd give here maybe is like a fidget spinner or something like that. That's a really low price point, low purchase price point, and somebody's going to buy it right away. The first time they're introduced to it maybe, but if you're not, then it could make sense to run longer attribution windows. Most of the time, what we usually run is initially we'll run these tests. We'll see which ones match up from a backend attribution perspective or an overall revenue or an incremental impact perspective on our clients' businesses. And then we'll choose those ones moving forward. But that doesn't negate the fact that we should continue trying to test these attribution windows over time and making sure that we're constantly running the right one. From a more specific perspective on how to actually test these attribution windows on Meta, for example, these are done on the ad set level. So if you do remember some of the testing guidelines and the campaign structure conversations that we've had, this would be considered a procedural test. So attribution windows should be done on that ad set level. And the most important piece of this, actually, I should back up. You should run your top ads that you already have data for your best 4 to 6 different ads, and you will duplicate those over to all of the attribution windows that you're testing, making sure that you're doing your best to split test as perfectly as possible. And then the most important piece here is trying to match up that data that you see on platform to your backend attributed data and your overall revenue data. Some people call this your marketing expense ratio. The biggest argument that I can see people having here is you have your attribution window on your platforms, but then you have your attribution window or your attribution on your actual backend conversions. The easy example here, and some that I bet everybody can probably attest to, especially if you're a Meta or a social media buyer and you're currently being judged on Google Analytics or GA4 as the attribution or as the source of truth, so to say, even though that's a completely different topic that we can get into maybe in the future too. GA4 basically 99% of the time is using last click. So if you're testing 7-day click, 1-day view on Facebook, but your backend software or GA4 is using last click, those two numbers are going to be, most of the time, they're going to be vastly different. So needing to test 1-day click there and trying to pair that up with that backend attribution data is important. The reason I talked a little bit about the overall data or overall revenue, like marketing expense ratio data, is because say you're that same advertiser who's running 7-day click, 1-day view, but you're getting judged on GA4 last click. You can see where those two things don't really see eye to eye, but you might have a longer sales cycle. You might see that those particular ads on 7-day click, 1-day view are having an impact from an overall revenue perspective. And you can run these tests in various markets, like a paired market test or incrementality tools can help you see these impacts as well. So there's a ton of different tests that you can run to actually make sure that your attribution windows on platform.
That's great. So is there a formula or an approach that one could take to determine which test to start with or which test will serve them best?
Yeah, there's definitely a good place to start, and there are some caveats here, but I figure if you're just starting out, you're probably not running on any other channel. If you're only running on one channel, and let's use Facebook as the example here because it's the easiest to talk to and it's the most popular. But if you're only running on one channel as you're just starting out, I would start out with 7-day click, 1-day view attribution. And the reason for that is you're giving Facebook or you're giving Meta the most amount of signals possible to optimize your campaigns. When you're first starting out, you don't have a fresh pixel, you don't have a lot of history on the account. You want to give as many data signals to Facebook as possible. But over time, you definitely want to look into those attribution window breakdowns. So you definitely want to test into other attribution windows to see if those other attribution window tests are driving better performance from a backend perspective. So that could be a shift over time. This is especially important when you start to run other channels, because what you may notice is if you're running 7-day click, 1-day view, you start up your Google search, you start a PMAX campaign, or you start a TikTok campaign, you might see Facebook starts to count more and more view conversions. That's that trending data that I mentioned earlier. You might see Facebook start to take more and more credit for view-based conversions, which means users are seeing your ad, but they're converting somewhere else. So you have an influence on that conversion, but ultimately another channel is taking credit for that as well, most likely, even though they could be going direct or organic. So if you start to see that trend on that view-based conversions getting bigger and bigger and bigger, it's even more alarming, or it's even more important to test out click-based conversions or optimized based on the click-based reporting view.
I see. So Dave, we're for me at least, we're living really in this sort of hypothetical world right now. Can you give me like a use case? Can you give me an instance when you ran some of these tests and maybe tell a little bit more of like a cohesive story that I might be able to latch onto?
Yeah, I can give one from an overall perspective, and then I can give a more recent test that we've done with some ballpark harder numbers to attach to, and then the impact that those actually had within the testing framework, and then the ultimate impact from moving into those attribution windows over time. One of the more recent ones was with an audit that I performed. So that audit I performed on Meta showed view-based, so 1-day view-based platform conversions took up a total of, I believe it was 63% or 65% of the total conversions, meaning only 35% were click-based conversions. So those are the types of ratios that should be alarming, because your ads, your targets that you're testing in your account, your ad sets, are only influencing view-based conversions, meaning those conversions are click-based influenced elsewhere. So those types of tests, again, those ratios should be alarming, and other windows should be tested to see if testing click-based conversions should or can have a measurable impact on back-end real revenue. Another important kind of definition here is there are basically two types of tests, right? I've mentioned view-based test and click-based tests. The largest attribution window you can use on Facebook is 7-day click, 1-day view. And in the algorithm's eyes, if you're using 7-day click, 1-day view, you're telling Facebook that you judge a 1-day view conversion the same as you do a 0 to 7-day click conversion. And logically, that doesn't really make much sense, right? I would much rather have people buying my product right away, right after they see the ad. But you're judging, or you're telling Facebook to judge your 1-day click conversions the same as your 1-day view conversions. So that's another great way, I think, to look at it. The other example that I have, this also was on a recent client, and we actually run these tests all the time. So this test was run from a 1-day click split tested against a 7-day click 1-day view. And even though I probably have repeated myself a couple of times here, we all know how all these platforms love to take credit for as much as they can. And the results on this particular test were pretty incredible. We saw a 1-day click attribution window. They over-reported by, I think it was 55% on platform, and 7-day click 1-day view attribution window over-reported backend conversions that were attributed to Facebook by, I think, upwards of 200% or 190%. So what that tells us is, in terms of the client's backend attribution, 1-day click attribution was much closer to their source of truth. And again, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek because there's a whole other conversation we can have in terms of source of truth. But due to 1-day click conversions having a much closer ratio to the real attributed conversions on the back end via Meta, we were able to move most of our spend on that platform over to 1-day click, and we were able to directly see an impact on real conversions on that back end. So it was much closer to the source of truth. We saw real revenue coming in. Luckily for this particular client, and here's one of the cons to running 1-day click, is you don't get as much data in your campaigns. That data, I think, is more valuable. So over time, you make those optimizations and you try and push for better baselines than you're seeing originally from a 1-day click perspective. And hopefully you can continue that trend over time. So ultimately for that client, 1-day click was the way to go forward on conversion-based campaigns for purchase. And that was a D2C e-com client.
Well, Dave, not a simple topic by any means, but definitely I'll speak for myself. I'm walking away with a lot more understanding that I did from the beginning. So what the heck is an attribution window? It's a defined period of time when conversion events can be claimed by a publisher or channel. Obviously, guys, and if I can get it, then anybody can. If you are looking to explode your own digital growth, you can get in touch with Jump 450 in the link below in the description. That is www.jump450.com. And we will be back here next week with more snackable, actionable strategies for you to steal from us. Dave, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks a lot, Matt. See ya.